And welcome back, everybody. We're chatting with Karlo Broussard, Catholic Answers Live. Of course, you're familiar with him there. Author of numerous fantastic books. The latest one is Purgatory's for Real, and we did a series on this program where we went through that. Just great stuff. And today we're talking about relativism. And, Karlo, great insight, because even if someone says, okay, there are some truths, but when it comes to the moral realm, there really isn't any truth. One truth is as good as another. All they're doing is just pushing that incoherence back a step. I mean, it's just a different kind of incoherence.
Right. It's going to require one further step, because it's one thing to make the statement, but then what are the implications? One thing to state the worldview about morality, but then what are the implications of that worldview? Right? And how we relate to it. And whenever we begin asking those questions, then we're going to see either the worldview as completely trivial or affirming living your life in insanity, right? Or affirming at least one absolute moral truth and thus refuting moral relativism.
Yeah. Good insights. Yeah. So ultimately, I guess that would be the first move, would be to discern whether they're making a universal claim about relativism or just a moral claim. If it's universal, then it's self-refuting. If it's moral, it's still self-refuting if you ask the question, ought everybody to follow that worldview? And
that is
correct.
End
up with that dilemma. Awesome.
Yeah, so there are many other ways to refute and critique moral relativism, but I think that's a good initial way, at least to try and expose its incoherence. And other ways that many people have proposed in refuting moral relativism is say, listen, it just contradicts our practical life and judgments that we make as human beings. If moral relativism were really true, there would be no way in principle that we could make any form of negative evaluation concerning people's behavior, whether within our own culture or any culture whatsoever. And all we could conclude with, as Dr. Peter Crave once put it, different strokes for different folks, and I happen not to like your strokes, right?
Right.
I mean, it would just simply be, I do not like your behavior, or we have different views or different behaviors, but I could not make a negative evaluation of your behavior and saying it's immoral, right? So moral relativism guts, any form of moral evaluation, praise or blame, in an entire sense. And most people, that conflicts with their sort of innate intuition of morality and say, no, that can't be right. And of course, you can always pull out those most atrocious evils, right, of Hitler, Nazism, or, torturing children, and even racism, right? I mean, we're coming to a point now, really, where it's almost that, relativism still lurks around, but I think we're coming to a point in our culture where moral relativism really is not so much at the forefront, because so many people are asserting absolute moral truths like racism is wrong. The problem is identifying where that racism is appropriately found, because what you have in modern culture is identifying some activity and slapping the label of racism on it, when in reality it's not racism, right? And so it's a sort of a new form of relativism, right? It's like, relative to my view of racism, you're a racist, right? Where you analyze their view of racism, it's not racism, it's something else, kind of like tolerance, right? Or intolerance. We're often labeled, those of us who espouse objectivism or absolute truth, we're often labeled as being intolerant, right?
Right.
Well, you have to ask the question, well, okay, so if we're violating tolerance in asserting something to be absolutely true and another belief to be false, well, what do you mean by tolerance? So you have, relative to your view of tolerance, we're being intolerant, because relative to most people's view of tolerance, what we call in philosophy egalitarian tolerance, where we must accept all views as equal and valid, well, then, yeah, I would be intolerant if I'm saying your view is not valid, is false, right?
Right.
But that's not what we have traditionally understood to be tolerance, which is like fraternal tolerance, where we respect the dignity of another human being while at the same time we disagree with them, thinking their view doesn't match up with reality, right?
Right.
So it's, so similarly within our culture, everybody's being labeled a racist, right? It's like, for example, there's this list of indicators of quote unquote white supremacy that was put out by some organization. I don't have the information in front of me right here, but identifying objective truth and linear thinking as being white supremacists, right?
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
And so notice it's relative to their definition of white supremacy and or racism. They judge objective truth and linear thinking to be racist. But of course, that's a false view of racism, right? And of course, we could critique that. So it's always important in our modern culture when we're slapped with these labels, to ask the question, well, what do you mean by tolerance? What do you mean by racism, right? And begin to analyze what they're saying. And then, of course, if they're going to say, well, you're being intolerant, for not accepting everyone's views as equal and valid. Well, wait a minute. If that's the case, well, then you're being intolerant for not accepting my view that I can judge somebody to be wrong as being equal and valid, right? And so they actually are guilty of the very intolerance that they criticize us for being. And thus it's incoherent.
Yeah, I mean, at one point in my life, I was kind of a truth for you, truth for me kind of person, until I realized that that's the most intolerant position of all. I always thought I was being very open and accepting. But actually what I was saying is, if you say something different, you're wrong. So I was basically wiping, half of the world's population that didn't agree with me that, a truth for you, truth for me, anybody that accepts objective truth is wrong. I was actually incredibly intolerant.
Yeah, because according to that view of intolerance, you were not tolerating their views to be true, right?
Yeah,
Within your own
exactly.
system of beliefs, you were intolerant of their view, not accepting it as equal and valid, which we would affirm, right? We say, yeah, that's good. If you think some view doesn't match up with reality, we ought to exclude it from our system of beliefs, right? Because we do not think it's true. And if we do not think it's true, then we ought not to believe it. So there's sort of this half-truth baked into this modern promotion of egalitarian tolerance. There's sort of this half-baked truth lurking in there that we have to try and expose, right?
Right.
So they will toot the horn of everyone's views are equal and valid, but in reality, they're not accepting everyone's views as equal and valid, like our view. The view that says there's absolute truth and some people are wrong.
Right, exactly. Yeah, so I mean, you do have to pick sides. I just figured, by abandoning the truth for you, truth for me, I have well over 1 billion people that would agree with me. So at least I'm being accepting by a lot of people rather than just this, small group of intolerant truth for you, truth for me people.